Okay. So today I have Mr. Phil Wilkerson, the infamous Ill Phil,
Hi.
and he is my mentor through VACE, the Virginia Association for Colleges and Employers, and he's an industry advisor at George Mason. And I can't remember the two disciplines you're working with, so
Oh, I got lots of disciplines. So let me hit you. And I had to remember this. So that's why I'm great. Media arts, design, sports and recreation, and hospitality and tourism.
okay,
Those
nice.
those are all my encompassing industries. And most recently was the sports and recreation and hospitality and tourism, because one of my colleagues retired and they added those additional industries to my portfolio or whatever.
Mhm.
But originally was just media arts design, and marketing, but they added because sports and rec and hospitality tourism has a lot of overlapping skills. So they added those two.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Mhm.
Well, tell us a little bit because today I kind of wanted to focus on graduating during times of uncertainty.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think, we can both kind of relate because within the decade or so, we've graduated and tried to start our career. So I thought we'd just offer some advice, being recession graduates to
Yeah,
those.
it's funny that when we discovered this topic, and we're gonna go back and forth about preparation and whatnot. I'll be totally honest. I didn't even realize I was in a recession in 2008. Like
Yeah.
as a student, I just wasn't paying attention to economics and uh, workplace transitions and what was going on in the grand scheme of the United States. I was just like, what? Like when you said that 2008, I had to actually go back and do some research because in my bubble, in my young mind, I didn't think of myself graduating in a recession. Um, and I didn't. I mean, I now that it gives now that you told me that, it does make sense why graduating and not being employed was a little difficult for me.
Mhm.
But I didn't. It was kind of like ignorance is bliss. I didn't realize I was entering a job market that was in a recession at that time. So found that very interesting in hindsight that I don't know if it would have made me more scared about going into the workforce or more, knowledgeable, but I didn't know that we were in a recession in 2008 until you brought up the topic and I did a little bit of back research. But
Yeah.
in that
Well,
time,
tell us.
I was not familiar with that being the circumstance for the United States and economy.
Yeah. So then what made it so easy for you to transition from college into like workforce?
I mean, it was like I said, it wasn't easy. It was actually very difficult. It was
Mhm.
just that it was very difficult, but I didn't know why. I thought I thought it was isolated to me not being prepared. I never went to the career center, but like once at JMU. So maybe it could have been, two things. It could have been like, wow, maybe if I was a little bit more prepared as a senior or super senior, because I took 5 years to graduate, maybe I could have been more prepared. And also having that acknowledgement of what was going on probably would have made me feel less like I was behind. Because when I graduated, I knew I was behind. I knew I was behind the curve. I knew that I wasn't up to par with some of my classmates. I wasn't prepared. I moved back at home with my parents, unemployed, did not know what I wanted to do. And my, like a lot of my peers, my wife was already doing her thing. And so it would have been good to know that, wow, like it wasn't just me. It was a little bit more of the overall system thing. And additionally, I could have probably done a little bit more research and, resume. Yeah, I could have done a lot of stuff that I'm teaching students to do now. It could have been a combination of that.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing too. Like, I think a lot of us that graduated during that time did move back home. And I don't feel like there's any shame in that game, like having a roommate or going somewhere, especially if financial circumstances, kind of demand that instead of being homeless or, kicked out or um, just not having good alternatives. Like, I moved home too, and it was humbling. But I also think that in difficult times, like we have to make difficult decisions. And that was somewhere that I was safe and I knew I would be fed and I had people that would live in a safe way. So we were good.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and we briefly emailed back and forth about preparing, you knew what kind of industry market, and you were way more prepared. I was a history major, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I studied history with the mindset that I knew I wasn't going to be a history teacher, but I
Sure.
just studied history because I enjoyed the classes and
Mm-hmm.
enjoyed the teachers, and I was doing well. But I didn't have a career focus. I was like, I just know that if I studied history, I get good grades. And so when I graduated, um, I could have done this a little bit earlier and said, what do you do with a history major? I don't know what you do with a history degree. And everyone was saying things like, oh, go to law school. A lot of history majors are lawyers and stuff. And I was like, okay, that sounds cool. And then I got the LSAT prep book and I didn't even touch it. I didn't even crack it. And I was like, well, I'm not going to law school. And so when I moved home, very proud of myself, I got a college degree. I literally was doing the career exploration phase home post grad, and I don't know what I didn't know how to look for jobs. I didn't know how to use my resume. I didn't know any of this stuff. And I was going to bring up the 2 points I think that was a blessing in disguise, which I think did turn out, was 2 things I would say was my 2 saving graces. One was, I didn't know at the time, but networking was great. Like, building relationships. I naturally am good at that, but I didn't know that that was a skill. I just thought I was talking to friends and family and asking questions. But technically now I know that's networking, right? And so that was one saving grace, was networking. And the other was, and I tell a lot of students like this, is I'm always just like that friend that was like, yo, you want to try this? And I was like, all right, like I ain't doing anything else. So being open to new opportunities. And so that, I think, was my saving grace for employment. And when I say that is, I asked friends who's got jobs, and one of my good friends, Justin Bell, he got me my first job out of college at a school with children with special needs called Alternative Paths. I had no training in, special ed. I had no training, but the organization just wanted people with college degrees, people that were patient, and was open to working with kids with autism, Down syndrome, with extreme behaviors. So I was like, all right, that's a job. I'll do it. And then number 2 was that openness to new opportunities. I was like, well, I got nothing else. My friends work there. Justin works there. My friend Hillard works there. This is an opportunity. This is a job. And I figured, I always do this. I was like, well, I guess the best place to look for the job that I want to do is while I have a job, like while I'm employed. So I was like, it's a starting job. I don't know anything about it, but I'll just be open to having a job. So I graduated in May, and because of that and building relationships, I was able to start that job in July, which is, when I think about it, was pretty good because I wasn't unemployed that long. I was employed.
Yeah. Well, and then my path was a little different because I did end up moving home, but that was when my nanny gig ended.
Mm-hmm.
And so I actually ended that prematurely. So my backstory was that I thought I was going to be a teacher. And so I wanted to get my MAT and my teaching credentials, but I wanted to give myself a year off because I had done really well at keeping my loans low. And so I just wanted essentially to be able to pay for my master's out of pocket, or close to. So I was like, all right, cool. I want to work with kids. If I'm going to go into teaching, might as well try this out. And I wanted to keep living in a big city because I was from the country and I had gone to school in Newport News. So I was like, ooh, Hampton Roads, this is a taste of city life. What's up? Yeah. Just to see if that was a good fit for me. Yeah. I think where you live has a big impact on your quality of life, right? And your happiness. So I wanted to try one of the big cities like Boston or New York. So I found a nanny gig to what I thought was close to New York City. Turns out I was like an hour away from the city, but I connected with a family that the kids had lost their father. I had lost my father. Like, I ended up moving in, and it was a great learning experience. Like, amazing. Mad respect for any parents like yourself. Yeah. Because like raising a kid, that's a whole nother challenge. And I really learned a lot about how kids develop because I had a 10, a 12, and a 15-year-old. And I was a nanny for a single mom who was a principal in New York City, but they lived an hour outside of the city because it was good schools and she didn't have to pay a ton in taxes. So I also learned a lot about networking. Like, I was in a place where there were a lot of other families. So I had to work really hard to make new friends. And that was part of the reason I ended up leaving early too, was I just didn't feel good there. But it was good in that I learned a lot and I saved a lot of money. Like I didn't have any housing expenses because I was a live-in with them. So I lived in the basement, paid down my student loans. And then when I came home, I still was like, well, I don't really know if I'm quite ready for grad school. So I started working some part-time jobs. Like I was part-time at a hotel, part-time at Old Navy. And then kind of like you, I was like, oh, I'll try some new things. Like, let's see, let's figure it out. And my cousin, who I really respected and had a lot of similarities to me work-wise, was like, hey, I've been working at this wine shop and they're actually trying to sell it. Like, you're not doing anything. Maybe you should buy a wine shop. And so like I became a business owner at 21 because I didn't really have other employment alternatives that were attractive to me. And like it taught me a lot. And I think it's ultimately why I've come back to get my master's in business administration. So, you know, there's a lot of silver lining in that struggle, I think.
Yeah, I think, and I think the commonalities too is that when I became employed in that time, you know, there's intangibles that people have, qualities that people have that show up in work that you never thought you had. So like, for instance, being patient. I was getting, you know, my tail whipped. I was going to try to be edited on this podcast, but kids was biting and kicking me, and, you know, it was extreme behaviors. So I realized that, like, wow, I can be very patient in extreme situations and turn my brain off and get cussed out, right? And so, and I'm thinking about all the things I learned because of that, how it translates to my work. Like, you know, if people are angry at me at work, I'm able to like look at it from a not personal lens, because, you know, those kids that were mean, you know, mad at me, it was just normal behaviors. It wasn't Philip Wilkerson. It was going to happen anyway. So I learned patience, and that's an intangible. I learned building rapport and asking questions. And when I say building rapport with those students, and they know me, Mr. They used to call me Mr. Phillip and all that stuff, but also with my other staff mates. You know, like I made good relationships with my colleagues, which I stay in touch with to this day. And then it was just also like, just knowing like I can learn anything. Like I never learned, I didn't know anything. I did not go to school for special education, but I knew behavior plans by the time I graduate. I mean, by the time I left that place, I knew what IEP was. I knew all these different things, but I learned it. And so that gave me the foundational base to realize that in my career, you don't necessarily have to have every single bullet point checked, right? There's things like, obviously you need to have a certain degree to get a job, or a certain level, you know, like if this is required, you need the requirements. But a lot of this stuff is like just intangibles. Like you'll learn it. Like no one can tell. I tell people now, because of overall experiences at 35 years old, I believe I'm capable of just about any job I want if I'm able to connect with the things they ask you to do with concrete examples of how I've done that before. So for instance, leading a team, oh man, like I never really led a team at work per se, but I was able to lead teams in my extracurriculars, or lead a team in my clubs or organizations, or in my fraternity, or with base, you know, things I've done outside of my normal 9 to 5. And it's like almost like now, because of those early experiences, I realized the bigger picture is that all this career stuff is a matter of being able to realize that overall life experiences, you know, you being a business owner, no one can tell you how to run a business now because of life experiences. So I tell students, don't over fixate when you're entering the job market or going from your next job to your next job to your next job. Oh, I have to know all this stuff, or I need to have all this like really professional experience. A lot of your experiences are just in your life. It's just a matter of how you are able to connect that to the employer and talk about it with confidence.
Yeah. And that's a big thing, right? Like communication, I think, is a big part of both of our respective roles, is just helping students understand that like what employers are looking for, they already have it. They just haven't been able to connect like the right word or the right timing just yet. So
yeah, it's playing matchmaker. And at the end of the day, it's literally looking at a job posting or any kind of opportunity and saying, look here, Mr. or Mrs. Employer, I see your job that you're doing. I can do this, and here are concrete ways that I have done this, because employers are looking for past experiences being an indicator of present day adversity, whatever, right? Like how you handled a situation in the past will indicate or show an employer how you will be amped to addressing that if it were to come up again. And that's why they ask you all these random questions like, tell me a conflict with someone. They just want to know that you were able to do it in the past. And if it comes up again, you can handle it. And so, I mean, and you know, telling everyone I can do any job I want to, like being realistic, like I can't be a, you know, rocket scientist, right? I don't have the bare requirements for rocket scientists, you know, but like any director, you know, or any job where it's like people related and I can really, really think bullet by bullet, like, can I draw a story that connects to that? I believe like everyone could try that, you know, within reason, within industries.
Yeah.
But I liked it. Like, what made you, I'm going to ask you a question and kind of connect. What made you want to go to grad school?
Yeah.
Did you think it was worth it?
Well, honestly, I didn't know what graduate school was until I got to college. So like I knew, so my parents didn't go to school, or at least didn't complete their degree, but both of my grandparents had. My grandmother was actually a nurse, and then my grandfather was a school teacher after he had done his time in the service. And so while they had education, they were also so far removed from it that they weren't really able to help guide and advise me on perhaps what my path might be. So they knew that with my skill set, teaching might be a good fit. So I knew that there might always be something at the end of that road. But honestly, until I got to undergrad, like I didn't know you could go get a doctorate in economics or that you could get a master's in counseling. Like all of these worlds were kind of opened up to me. And so I knew that additional credentials and like grad school was going to be part of my future. But at the time, I thought it was going to be for teaching. But then also being there for 4 years and having what I felt like was this really formative experience, like learning about myself, making friends, identifying my values, and of course, like working on your education to improve your life and your work opportunities. But I think what it really boiled down to was after spending that time and making that kind of sacrifice of resources too, right? Like making sure the money's there. If I was going to go to grad school, like I wanted it to be for something I was 110% sure of.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So like,
well, that was like I said, we are on the two opposite ends of the coin. Like you are way more. You said make it worth it 100%. Like I love it. Like I just love how some people are more prepared, and it doesn't devalue my experience, but it's just like. Like some people, like I meet so many people, and I'm like, wow, y'all really had it planned out. I literally had no clue. Like it was in my job that I was working with kids. I was like, wow, maybe I should get a master's in education. Like kind of like, but I think work experience. And so I looked, and all I did was Google George Mason because I'm not moving. My girlfriend at the time, aka my wife now, she's not moving. I was like, I have to go to grad school within the DMV. That literally, my filter was DMV, grad school, and then I looked, I was like, I'm not taking the GRE. Like, and that literally was it. That was my research. So I literally Googled it and I said, Masters of Education, Northern Virginia. Mason popped up, right? The Mason link. I clicked the link and I was just scrolling. Oh, wow. I don't want to be a school teacher. There's a counseling program at Mason. That sounds cool. I clicked on the link and I saw the admissions requirement. It was like, you need to have 1,000 hours of working with people and log it like yourself.
Right.
And you needed to, prove, have an interview. I was like, wow, that's what I'm going to do. Cause that was about as far as I went. So I used all my hours from my current job at the school with kids and I did an interview and I did the interview. And this is the funniest part is that the job that I was working at was in Alexandria. And so the interview, which is so weird, was on a normal school night at Wednesday. So at 4 something, right? And the school doesn't light out. So I had to ask permission for my job to go to this grad school interview. And I drove from Alexandria, Virginia, all the way to Fairfax, which is about, in that time with traffic and all that, was about, 40 minutes longer, way longer than it needed to be. I had my suit because I knew professionally wear a suit to an interview. I had my suit in the car. I get to Mason. I parked the car, but I didn't know. I literally lived here my whole life and didn't know how huge Mason's parking lot was. Had to run. Was kind of running. Was already like, oh, I'm gonna be late. Ran to the Johnson Center where the interview was. put on my suit in the bathroom,
Yep.
like tie all that in the bathroom. I ran up to the interview room, which was, and I thought this was a one-on-one interview, and I busted the door like Kramer, and I realized it was a panel interview, meaning there was more than one interviewer. There was a bunch of professors in the program, and then there was like 12 students in the show. And I busted, and I'm like, oh, my name's Philip. And she's like, and it's Dr. Chung. She was like, she remembers. She was like, "Why, Philip? It's so nice to meet you." Or like, "I'm glad you can join us." And I like scoot in between people and sit down. And you know, I do my interview questions. I'm always good at talking. And literally for 3 years of that master's program, she literally reminded me every day, like, "Oh, so glad that you can join us on time for class." I was like, "Yeah." Like, did you realize how I was changing the bathroom? And additionally, I got the employee of the month at Mason. Mason, I invited Dr. Chung to that, to say thank you so much for this opportunity, because of your grad school program, I was able to find what I wanted to do, working with students and all that, yada, yada, yada. She told the president that story of how I showed up late. And I was like, look at me now. So, but I just go along to say, like, I tell people, like, don't over fixate. Like, we are two different edges of the coin, right? Like, you are prepared. You know what school you want to be in. I'm a floater. I kind of just try to look good on, I make next steps. Like, that sounds good. Let me do that. And there's no, I would tell people there is no right or wrong for that. Like your path to do this is great. It's excellent. And it's what students need to do. Mine, maybe please show up on time for interviews. Don't take that as a lesson from this story. But the lesson from my story is that, like, when I Googled that program at George Mason, it doesn't need to be like something super sophisticated. Like, everyone thinks like, oh, this is the #1 ranked program, and it has to be #1 in the country, or it has to be. No, sometimes it can literally be like as simple as, it's in where I want to live. I can afford it.
Yep.
I'm able to get in. And that is just as much research that you need to do for your next opportunity. So I tell people, be prepared, but don't over prepare. Like, it doesn't have to be like check every single box and the perfect fit. Like, just be open to the next experience. And then while in that program or whatever you're doing, that next experience, you're going to meet so many people. I met so many great professors. I met so many great classmates that I stayed in touch with. And it's just kind of like, boom. And then next step, and then next step, and next step after that. But, I work with a lot of students where they really I wouldn't say over plan, but they think their next step has to be perfect. And I was like, no, it doesn't. Your next step just needs to be a step, like one advancement. It doesn't have to be, it just something different, and you feel like you're moving forward. Progress. It doesn't have to be perfect progress, right? Progress, whether perfect or imperfect, is progress. One step forward. If you look back in your trajectory with mistakes and failures and embarrassments and all the different things, at least that when you make that next step, if you look back, you're still further along than when you started.
Right.
Like, I got a master's now. Somehow your boy got a master's, right? Somehow you got a job, but it wasn't perfectly orchestrated. It wasn't planned to the T. It was just like one next step after one next step, and being open and asking questions. Like, while I was in the program, like, oh, with a master's in education, where do people go to work? Like things like that. I didn't know what I was just figuring it out. Like, oh, this is where some of the and I looked up where the alumni went, and I'm like, oh, these people like me in my grad school program, these are where they end up working too. And you kind of like, that's how you figure it out. Like, next step after next step.
Yeah. No, and I think that's great. And I think that's a big skill, adaptability, especially in this time, is just knowing that, okay, if you thought, or if your plan was, I'm going to go work at Disney, maybe not right now, Yeah. So like, what was it? Let's drill back down and figure out, what was it about working at Disney that excited you? And then try to find that excitement in another opportunity, another location. Like, that's the main takeaway I think I'm trying to make sure students know, is that during this time, like, your plan doesn't have to be completely altered, but I think it is going to make students really think about what they want their next step to be, versus when there were perhaps a little more availability of opportunities.
I like that. And I like what you just said. What do I like about this thing? It was similar to that too. It's like, what do I like about insert experience, and what is the closest thing I can get to realistically? Like, man, I really like Disney, and I really like all their events that they do, and they make people happy with the rides and all that stuff. Well, Disney's closed, so okay. Well, I really like building experiences for people and something else, right? And then you try to find the closest thing, like, okay, well, maybe I have to work at Six Flags down the street. You know what I'm saying? Like Six Flags in Maryland, because it's close and doesn't have the bells and whistles as Disney, but I at least learn relevant things. That was what made me attracted to Disney. And then, like you said, I like what you said, maybe not right now. Then maybe you can use those experiences at Six Flags to get you closer to Disney and say, wow, you know what? Now that I have these experiences, when I do apply for Disney, I can tell Disney I've done X, Y, and Z. But that's just a random connection, and that might not be that trajectory, but like I try to tell students, like, what do you really like, and can we get you as close as we can to that? But you don't have to table it. You don't have to, like, say your dreams are diminished. Maybe they're just on hold. Either just on hold, or it's going to be a pivot. That's all. It's just a pivot, but it's not going to completely derail you. And it is interesting times with COVID. Like, a lot of things that students want to do are in person, right? I'm like, dang, that's crazy. Like, so can we try to work with you? Like, how much of these things that you like to do while it's in person, how can we replicate it as close as we can in a digital space? Is there any way where you can still, connect with people in a digital space to still get that fulfillment that you like, that purpose that you like? In the meantime, because obviously we have to work with what we have. And, like I'm saying, speaking from my own experience, like, I love people. This is really hard for me, right? But I'm still getting experiences that are related, talking to you on this platform, or still planning stuff, or doing social media. Like, so it's like, you have to work with what you have and then find ways to replicate it as close as you can, so that when we get back to being in person or whatever, I'm ready, I'm prepared. Like, I have, and also I've learned new skill sets. Like, I've become more tech savvy because I've tried to learn new skills during this time to still give me fulfillment, that when we get back to in person, I'm like, wow, well, I'm a little bit more comfortable with using online platforms to do presentations and all that stuff. So I tell students, use this digital time to learn something new, and something new that as close as you can to what you like, so that when we get back to normal life, you still have another thing on your tool belt.
Yeah. Well, I think that's great. And we're coming to the end of our time here, Phil. And I know you are a busy industry advisor at George Mason right now. But just wanted to say thank you. And can you let our students know how they might be able to follow up with you? Any passions that you have? Insert podcast plug here. That any ways our students could follow up with you or connect with you after this.
Well, so one, thank you so much for having me on this platform. Definitely you're doing a big thing too. And because this is obviously ways to reach, I tell anyone, if you want to express yourself creatively, like creative wise, do stuff like this, make videos, learn something new, play around with Zoom, whatever. You can follow up with me on LinkedIn professionally. I'm trying to, I tell every student that you need to have a digital presence on LinkedIn, especially during this time, because networking is going to be key to your job. And while we can't go to career fairs and in-person venues, utilize LinkedIn to really connect with employers, ask questions, use that platform. So you can follow me on LinkedIn. I'll give Leslie the link that she can put in the notes or whatever. Follow up me on LinkedIn. And I definitely will help you on, hit me up and ask me questions. I definitely can help on that platform. And then additionally, shout out, thank you for the plug. I do like to talk about wellness and well-being and positivity. So as a creative project on the side, I started a podcast about 3 years ago called Positive Philter. Positive and then filter with the PH. I'm so clever. And so, follow that on all the podcast platforms, iTunes, Stitcher, whatever. So I'll put that in the notes, but it's Positive Philter. Every episode, I just talk to people such as my friends like Leslie, and we just talk about random topics. But in every topic, no matter what, family, career, jobs, all that stuff, we just try to talk about the optimism and optimistic view of that adversity or challenge or whatever, because it's positive. It's a positive filter. So it was just something I wanted to do to kind of like learn something new, a new skill. Now I can say I know how to podcast. It wasn't planned, but those are the two things. So follow up with me on LinkedIn and follow up with me on the Positive Filter podcast.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for your time today, Phil. Hope you have a great week, man.
All right, thank you so much.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.